The lamplight in the saloon was thick with smoke and the smell of stale beer, painting everything in shades of dingy yellow. Alara stood on the small stage, her voice, a tired but clear bell, cutting through the rowdy noise. Her satin dress, once a vibrant red, now hung a little limp, faded from countless nights under the flickering gaslights. She swayed gently, her eyes scanning the blurry faces below, each one a stranger, each one a potential problem. It was 1880, and this dusty Kansas town called Harmony Creek offered little in the way of its namesake. Alara had seen too many sunsets paint the prairie sky in hues of orange and purple, only to watch them fade into another long, draining night. Her fingers, nimble on the piano keys, moved almost on their own, a memory of music more than a passion. What she truly felt was a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that clung to her like the dust on her worn boots. Every note she sang, every smile she forced for the rough men clinking their glasses, chipped away a little more of her spirit. Beneath the sleeve of her dress, where the fabric usually draped, lay a secret, a mark of ownership she couldn't erase. It was a brand, stark and cruel, etched into her skin. Silas, the man who owned the brothel next door, and by extension, Alara herself, had put it there. It was his twisted way of showing everyone, and especially her, that she belonged to him. The thought of it, a constant phantom ache, fueled a quiet fire within her. It was a fire she usually kept banked, hidden deep, but tonight, it felt like it was starting to flicker higher. She finished her song, the last notes hanging in the air for a moment before being swallowed by the clamor. A few claps, a whistle or two, and then it was time to step down. Her legs felt heavy, each movement a conscious effort. As she made her way through the crowded room, she kept her gaze down, avoiding eyes that lingered too long. She just wanted to reach the back room, to find a moment of quiet before the next set, before the next command from Silas. The weight of the brand felt heavier tonight, a hot, angry whisper against her skin, promising a reckoning she didn't yet understand. Alara slipped through the saloon's back door and into the narrow, dark hallway that led to the brothel next door. The air here was thicker, heavy with cheap perfume and unsaid sorrow. She hoped to reach her small, cramped room without notice, to simply disappear for a precious hour. But fate, as it often did, had other plans. As she rounded a corner, a shadow detached itself from the wall, growing into the imposing figure of Silas. He was a big man, not in a strong way, but in a way that seemed to take up too much space. His clothes were expensive but rumpled, and his eyes, small and dark, held a cold gleam that always made Alara's skin crawl. A heavy gold chain hung across his waistcoat, catching the faint light from a distant lamp. "Leaving so soon, Alara?" His voice was a low growl, laced with a false sweetness that was more chilling than any shout. Alara stopped, her heart thumping like a trapped bird against her ribs. She tried to keep her face blank, her voice steady. "Just heading to my room, Silas. I have another set in an hour." He took a step closer, and Alara instinctively recoiled. "Do you now?" He chuckled, a wet, unpleasant sound. "Funny, I thought you might be trying to sneak away. You've been looking mighty restless lately." His gaze dropped to her arm, where the brand lay hidden. It was as if he could see through the fabric, feel the mark of his ownership. "I'm not trying to sneak anywhere," Alara said, her voice a little sharper than she intended. The weariness of the night, the constant fear, and the simmering anger about the brand were all bubbling to the surface. Silas's smile vanished. "Watch your tone, girl. You forget who you belong to." He reached out, his thick fingers closing around her arm, right over where the brand was. His grip was surprisingly strong, painful. Alara gasped, a jolt of fear mixed with fury shooting through her. "Let go of me," she demanded, trying to pull away. He held tighter, twisting her arm. "You think you're so special, don't you? You think that pretty voice makes you more than you are." His face was close now, his breath sour. "Your property, Alara. My property, and you'll do what I say." He squeezed harder, grinding his thumb into the branded skin. The pain was a sharp, burning arrow. It wasn't just the physical ache. It was a reminder of every indignity, every moment of lost freedom, every tear shed in silent despair. Something inside Alara snapped. The bank fire ignited into a blaze. She saw red. Her free hand shot out, finding something on a nearby shelf, a heavy, ornate brass lamp. Without thinking, she swung it, not aiming, just reacting, desperate to escape his grasp, to make him stop. The heavy brass lamp connected with a sickening thud. Silas stumbled backward, his grip on Alara's arm loosening for just a moment. That moment was all she needed. She tore her arm free, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Silas grunted a surprised sound and raised a hand to his head, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and rage. A dark stain began to spread on his forehead where the lamp had struck. Alara didn't stop to think. The built-up fear, the pain from the brand, the endless humiliation, it all exploded into a desperate need to escape. She swung the lamp again, this time with more force, more intent. It was no longer just a reaction. It was a primal scream for freedom. The lamp struck him squarely in the chest, pushing him off balance. He gasped a strangled noise, and then his eyes rolled back in his head. Silas toppled backward, a heavy, lifeless weight, hitting the wooden floor with a dull, echoing thud. The brass lamp clattered from Alara's numb fingers, rolling a few inches before coming to rest. Silence descended, thick and suffocating, broken only by Alara's ragged breathing. She stood frozen, staring at the still form of Silas. His expensive waistcoat was askew, his gold chain glinting dully against the dark floor. A small pool of red began to seep from beneath his head. Her mind, usually so quick, felt slow and cloudy, like wading through thick molasses. She had done it. She had struck him. She had made him stop. But now he was truly still. A tremor started in her hands and quickly spread through her whole body. Her knees felt weak, threatening to buckle. She had fought back. For the first time, she had truly fought back against the man who had stolen her name, her dignity, her very self. The brand on her arm, once a symbol of his control, now felt like a burning badge of defiance. But the defiance was quickly overshadowed by a creeping horror. Silas wasn't just stopped, he was dead. The reality hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her breath caught in her throat. She had never meant to kill him, only to make him let go, to give her a moment of peace. Now, there would be no peace, only a different kind of terror. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Someone had heard the thud, the clatter. Alara's eyes darted around, looking for an escape, but there was nowhere to go. She was trapped, standing over the man she had just killed. The moment of desperate defiance had passed, leaving behind a cold, stark truth. She was a murderer. The footsteps grew louder, quickening, and Alara braced herself. A moment later, the hallway was filled with shouting and gasps. Several faces, pale and shocked, peered around the corner. Then, the crowd parted, and Sheriff Brody stepped into view. Sheriff Brody was a man carved from the harsh Kansas plains. His face was lined from sun and worry, and his eyes, a clear, steady blue, missed nothing. He wore a dusty brown duster coat over his simple shirt and trousers, and a badge gleamed dully on his chest. He was known throughout Harmony Creek for his unwavering sense of justice, a justice that was often swift and unyielding. There was no warmth in his gaze as he took in the scene. Silas, still and crumpled on the floor, and Alara, standing over him, pale as a ghost, the forgotten brass lamp lying near her feet. His eyes, usually so calm, narrowed as they met hers. He didn't need anyone to tell him what had happened. The story was clear in the still body, the weapon, and the desperate, terrified look on Alara's face. He pulled off his hat, revealing a shock of sandy hair, and ran a hand through it, a rare sign of his own disquiet. "Alara," he said, his voice low and steady, a voice that commanded attention. "What happened here?" Alara opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her throat felt tight, choked with fear and a strange, hollow emptiness. She wanted to explain, to scream about the brand, about Silas's cruel grip, about the years of being treated like dirt. But she knew it was useless. Who would believe a saloon singer, a branded woman, over a man like Silas, even if he was a brute? People saw what they wanted to see. They would see a murderess. Sheriff Brody took another step closer, his hand resting lightly on the gun at his hip. "I need you to tell me, Alara." She finally found her voice, a whisper. He wouldn't let go. She gestured vaguely at her arm, then at Silas. "He hurt me. I wanted him to stop." Brody's gaze flickered to her arm, then back to Silas. He knew the rumors about Silas, about how he treated his girls, but rumors weren't proof. Not in the eyes of the law. "Alara," he said again, his voice now tinged with a solemn finality, "I'm arresting you for the murder of Silas Thorne." He moved with purpose, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Alara didn't resist. Her shoulders slumped, and she lowered her gaze, accepting her fate. She expected no mercy from this town, from this man of stern justice. She was just a saloon girl, a piece of property, and now a killer. Her end, she felt sure, would be quick and unfair. The cold iron bars clanged shut with a final, echoing sound. Alara flinched, even though she had expected it. The small jail cell was stark, smelling of damp earth and old fear. A narrow cot with a thin, scratchy blanket sat against one wall, and a bucket in the corner served as a privy. No windows, just a small, barred opening high up, letting in only the faintest sliver of moonlight. She sank onto the cot, the rough fabric of her dress feeling alien and out of place in this desolate space. The handcuffs had been removed, but the invisible chains of her fate felt heavier than ever. Her mind replayed the events, a blur of Silas's sneering face, the burning pain on her arm, the desperate swing of the lamp. It had all happened so fast, a whirlwind of fear and instinct. Now, in the quiet darkness, a profound sense of hopelessness washed over her. She was a saloon singer, branded and owned, a woman with no family, no friends who would risk anything for her. Who would speak for her? Who would care that Silas had terrorized her for years? The townspeople, she knew, saw her as a fallen woman, and Silas, for all his cruelty, had been a prominent, if feared, figure. His word, his standing, would always outweigh hers. She imagined the whispers that would already be spreading through Harmony Creek. Asterisk, the saloon girl killed Silas. She's a murderess. Deserves what's coming to her. Asterisk, no one would believe her story of self-defense. They would call it a lie, a desperate plea from a woman of low repute. Her suffering, the years of silent abuse, would be ignored, dismissed as the deserved fate of someone like her. A tear traced a path down her dusty cheek, then another. It wasn't just fear for her life. It was a deep, aching grief for the life she had never truly had. A life where she was free, unbranded, and safe. A life where her voice was heard, not just for singing, but for telling her truth. But that life was a distant dream, now shattered by the clang of jail cell bars. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around herself, trying to find some small comfort in the cold cell. The brand on her arm pulsed, a constant reminder of the torment that had led her here. She closed her eyes, wishing for sleep, for escape, for anything that would take her away from this crushing certainty that she was utterly alone and that no one would ever believe her. Hours crawled by in the oppressive silence of the jail. Alara had drifted into a fitful sleep, her dreams haunted by Silas's sneering face. She awoke to the dim light of dawn filtering through the high opening, and the steady presence of Sheriff Brody seated on a wooden chair just outside her cell. He sat with his hat in his lap, his gaze fixed on some distant point, a silent sentinel. He hadn't left. Alara had expected to be alone, forgotten. His presence, though stern, was a surprising anchor in her sea of despair. After a long while, he stirred, clearing his throat. "You said he wouldn't let go," Brody stated, his voice quiet, devoid of accusation. "And that he hurt you." Alara looked up, surprised by his words. She had expected questions about the murder, not about her. Hesitantly, she began to speak, her voice rough from disuse. She told him about the brand, pulling back her sleeve to reveal the ugly, burn mark. Brody's clear blue eyes, which had held such rigid judgment, now softened, if only a fraction. He looked at the mark, a grim line forming on his lips. She spoke of the day Silas had bought her, how her dreams of a simple, decent life had been crushed. She spoke of the endless nights, singing, the forced smiles, the constant fear of Silas's temper. Her words were not dramatic or loud. They were simply honest, a quiet spilling of years of pain. She described how Silas would pinch her, twist her arm, or worse, threaten her with losing her singing voice if she dared to displease him. He called me his property, Elara whispered, her voice cracking with remembered humiliation. Said I was nothing more than that. He wanted me to remember it every single day. She looked at Brody, tears finally falling freely down her face. I never meant to kill him, Sheriff. I just wanted him to stop hurting me, to stop treating me like I wasn't even a person. Brody listened, his face unmoving, but a subtle change began to work within him. He was a man of the law, a man who saw things in black and white. But Elara's story, told with such raw honesty and deep, aching grief, was painting shades of gray he hadn't expected. He saw the genuine sorrow in her eyes, not the cunning of a liar. He saw the weariness of a spirit long crushed, not the coldness of a killer. He had always believed in justice, but what was justice for a woman who had been branded and abused, pushed to a breaking point? The image of the brand on her arm, a stark testament to her words, burned in his mind. His initial judgment, as solid as the jailhouse walls, began to crumble piece by agonizing piece. He found himself not just listening, but truly hearing. And what he heard was a cry for understanding, not just for freedom. Brody sat for a long time after Elara finished speaking, the silence in the jailhouse broken only by the distant sounds of the town waking up. The morning sun, now a little brighter, cast bars of light across the jail cell floor, but it did little to lighten the heavy thoughts weighing on the sheriff's mind. He had always seen the world in clear lines, good and bad, right and wrong, law and crime. But Elara's quiet, heartfelt words had smudged those lines, blurring them into a confusing swirl of pain and circumstance. He thought of the brand on her arm, a cruel mark he hadn't truly considered before. He'd known Silas was a hard man, a man with a reputation for sharp dealings and even sharper words. But to brand another human being like livestock, that was a cruelty that went beyond mere business. It spoke of a deep-seated meanness that Brody, in his rigid adherence to the law, had perhaps overlooked. Elara's grief was so raw, so honest, it struck a chord deep within him. It wasn't the dramatic wailing of a woman caught in a lie, but the quiet, deep sorrow of someone who had carried too much for too long. He saw not a cold-blooded killer, but a soul pushed to the edge, reacting out of pure desperation. He remembered the day he had arrested her, the swiftness of his judgment. Asterisk murder. Asterisk the word had been so easy to say. But now he wondered, was it truly murder when a person fought back against a life of endless torment? Was it truly a crime to defend oneself from someone who saw you as property, not a person? Brody looked at Elara, who had curled up on her cot again, her face buried in her arms. He pictured his own sister, strong and spirited, and felt a pang of something he rarely allowed himself to feel. Empathy. What if someone had treated her that way? What would she have done? His beliefs, once as solid as the rock formations outside Harmony Creek, began to shift and crack. The law was meant to protect, to ensure justice. But what if the law, in its blind application, failed to see the whole truth? What if it punished the victim while letting the true villain's cruelty go unexamined? The injustice of Elara's situation gnawed at him. Silas, the man who had branded her, tormented her, had been a pillar of the town, albeit a dark one. His death would be mourned by some, and even those who disliked him would still see Elara as the criminal. Brody knew the town. They wouldn't care about a branded saloon singer's suffering. They would just want quick justice. But now Brody cared. He felt a growing unease, a sense that he had to look deeper, that simply following the letter of the law wouldn't be enough here. He had to understand. He had to see if there was a different kind of justice for Alara. With Alara's story echoing in his mind, Sheriff Brody left the jailhouse, no longer a mere lawman, but a man driven by a quiet, insistent doubt. He headed straight back to the brothel, the scene of Silas's death, now looking at it with fresh eyes. The hallway still held a faint, cloying scent, but Brody noticed new details. On the wall where Alara said she grabbed the lamp, there were faint scuff marks, consistent with something being violently pulled from a shelf. He examined Silas's body again, noting the bruises on his forearm where Alara had struggled to free herself. These small things, easy to miss in the first rush, now spoke volumes. He then started talking to the other women who worked for Silas. At first, they were scared, their eyes darting nervously. Silas had ruled with an iron fist, and his ghost still seemed to linger. But Brody, with his calm, steady presence, assured them he was just looking for the truth. He spoke gently, offering a rare kindness that slowly chipped away at their fear. One young woman, a timid girl named May, finally spoke up, her voice barely a whisper. She confirmed Alara's account of the brand, even showing Brody a similar, though smaller, mark on her own leg. He said we were his property, Sheriff, she choked out, tears welling in her eyes. He said if we ever tried to leave, he'd make sure no one would ever take us. Another woman, older and world-weary, spoke of Silas's explosive temper, how he would often grab the girls, shaking them, twisting their arms when they displeased him. She described him throwing things, breaking furniture, and the constant fear they lived under. He was a cruel man, Sheriff, she said, her voice firm despite her fear. He saw us as nothing but his to command. Brody also visited the saloon keeper, a grizzled man named Hank who had seen too much. Hank admitted that Silas often boasted about his ownership of the girls, especially Alara, whom he seemed to enjoy tormenting the most. Hank had heard the shouts that night, but had dismissed them as another one of Silas's temper tantrums. As Brody gathered these small pieces of information, a clear picture began to form, one that painted Silas not as a respected, if stern, businessman, but as a tyrant. The brand, the fear in the women's eyes, the casual cruelty, all confirmed Alara's story. Silas's true nature, hidden behind a veneer of power, was slowly being revealed. The evidence, though circumstantial, was piling up, showing that Alara's act was not one of cold murder, but of desperate survival. Brody felt a growing certainty. Alara was telling the truth. As Sheriff Brody pieced together the truth of Silas's cruelty, a different kind of story was spreading like wildfire through Harmony Creek. The news of Silas Thorne's death, especially at the hands of a saloon girl, had ignited a fierce anger in the town. People gathered and hushed, then increasingly loud, groups, their faces grim and their voices sharp. Silas, for all his dark ways, had been a fixture, a man of property, even if that property included human beings. The townsfolk, many of whom owed him money or feared his influence, saw his death as an affront to order, a dangerous act that needed quick and harsh punishment. They didn't care about Alara's story of abuse. They cared about their own sense of security, their own rigid ideas of right and wrong. A fallen woman, that's what she is, cried Mrs. Gable, a stout woman with a pinched face, clutching her market basket. Murdering a respectable businessman like Silas. It's an outrage. She deserves to hang, shouted a farmer, spitting tobacco juice onto the dusty street. Can't let the likes of her get away with such a deed. It'll set a bad example. The whispers turned into demands, then into outright shouts. A mob mentality began to form, fueled by fear, gossip, and the prevailing prejudices of the time. To them, Alara was not a victim, but a dangerous criminal, a harlot who had dared to cross the line. Her status as a saloon singer, someone outside the bounds of polite society, only made it easier for them to condemn her. They saw her as less than human, undeserving of mercy or understanding. They pounded on the sheriff's office door, their angry faces pressed against the grimy windows of the jail. "Bring her out, Brody," they roared. Let justice be done. Sheriff Brody watched from his office, his face etched with worry. He knew this town, knew their quick tempers and their unwavering belief in their own righteousness. He had always been the one to enforce their justice, to carry out their will. But now, their will felt wrong, blind to the truth he was uncovering. The anger was a palpable thing, a hot, suffocating blanket that threatened to smother any chance of a fair hearing for Alara. She was already guilty in their eyes, condemned before a single word of her defense could be spoken. Brody knew he was fighting against more than just a crime. He was fighting against years of ingrained prejudice and a town's demand for vengeance. He clenched his jaw, the weight of his growing conviction clashing with the roaring fury outside. The shouts of the angry townsfolk outside the jailhouse grew louder, a wave of human fury threatening to break down the doors. Brody stood by the window, watching the sea of agitated faces, their demands for Alara's blood echoing in the small office. He could have easily given in, let the town have its quick, brutal justice. It would have been the easier path, the path expected of him. But the image of Alara's branded arm, the quiet desperation in her voice, and the collective testimony of Silas's cruelty burned in his mind. He turned from the window, his jaw set. His heart was pounding, not from fear of the mob, but from the weight of the decision he was making. He was about to go against everything the town believed, everything he had been taught about law and order. He was about to stand up for a woman whom most considered worthless, against a man they had, in their own way, respected. He walked to Alara's cell, the clamor from outside filling the jail. Alara was awake, sitting on her cot, her eyes wide with terror. She had heard the shouts, understood their meaning. "They want me, don't they, Sheriff?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the din. "They'll hang me." Brody looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw a scared woman, not a monster. He saw a victim, not a villain. He believed her. And in that moment, belief turned into a fierce, unshakable resolve. "No," he said, his voice firm, cutting through the noise. "Not if I can help it." Alara's eyes widened further, a flicker of something new. Hope? Entering them for the first time. "I've talked to the others," Brody continued, speaking quickly, his words like a promise. "May, Hank, some of the other girls. They've all told me about Silas, about how he treated you, about the brand." He tapped his chest over his heart. "I believe you, Alara. I believe you acted in self-defense." The words hung in the air, powerful and unexpected. Alara had never thought she would hear them from anyone, let alone the stern sheriff. Brody took a deep breath, steeling himself. "This town, they're angry. They want to see what they think is justice. But I know what the truth is, and I'm going to fight for it. I'm going to fight for you." He made his decision. He would not hand her over. He would not let her be condemned without a fight. He would stand against the tide of the town's anger, against their prejudice, and he would try to prove Alara's innocence. It was a daunting task, one that could cost him his badge, his reputation, even his life. But for the first time in a long time, Brody felt truly aligned with the meaning of justice, not just its rules. The roar of the crowd outside was a physical force, shaking the jailhouse windows. Brody took a deep breath, adjusted his hat, and walked towards the main door. He knew what awaited him. Angry faces, hateful words, perhaps even threats. But the fear he felt was a small thing compared to the conviction burning inside him. He had promised Alara. He would fight. He unbarred the heavy door and stepped out onto the porch, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol, not as a threat, but as a silent sign of his authority. The mob, a sea of scowling faces, surged forward, then stopped, surprised by his sudden appearance. A hush fell, quickly replaced by a wave of renewed shouts. "Sheriff, hand her over. She's a killer. Don't protect her." Brody raised his hand, a gesture for silence. It took a moment, but the noise slowly died down, replaced by a low grumble. He looked at the faces before him. Farmers, merchants, town wives, all people he knew, people he had sworn to protect and serve. "Listen to me." Brody's voice, usually calm, now rang out with a new, powerful authority that cut through the remaining murmurs. "I know what you've heard. I know what you think you know about Silas Thorne and about Alara. He paused, letting his words sink in. But I've been doing my job. I've been looking into this, talking to folks, gathering facts. And what I've found paints a different picture. A wave of disbelief and anger rippled through the crowd. What picture, Brody? Someone sneered. A painted whore killing a good man. Brody's eyes narrowed. Silas Thorne was no good man, he stated, his voice clear and firm. He was a cruel man. A man who branded women like cattle, who abused them, who held them captive through fear and debt. He looked directly at Mrs. Gable, who gasped and looked away. Alara was one of those women. She didn't murder Silas. She fought for her life, for her dignity, against a man who saw her as nothing more than property. He pulled out a small, crudely drawn sketch he'd made of the brand on Alara's arm, holding it up for all to see. This is what Silas did to her. This is what he did to other women in this town, women too scared to speak. Alara acted in self-defense, a desperate act to stop years of torment. The crowd mumbled, some faces showing shock, others still hardened by disbelief. Brody pressed on, his gaze unwavering. I'm a law in Harmony Creek, and the law is about truth, not just about what's easy to believe. I will not hand Alara over to you. I will fight to prove her innocence, to show this town what true justice looks like. And I expect you all to listen, to open your minds, and to let the truth be heard. He stood tall, a single man against a hostile town, ready to face whatever came next, his belief in Alara and in a fair justice shining bright.